Hey there, everybody. This is Kenny. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is the podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. Did you know that trust is actually a science? That there's a science to trust? As a leader, what happens if there's mistrust of you, if your team doesn't trust you anymore, or if you don't have trust for maybe your leader? Well, I got to talk to the trust expert, author, and speaker, Natalie Doyle Oldfield, joined me today, and wait till you hear her perspective on everything around trust, including how do you really get your teams to rise to that next level? How does this impact the hiring process? As well as how do you just improve your results? You don't want to miss a second of this important conversation. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Yeah.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. I have a tremendous leader today. I can't wait to dive into the topic and not just the topic, but just about leadership in general with her. So I want to introduce the leader that helps others become the most trusted in their industry, truth expert, author, and speaker, Natalie Doyle Oldfield has joined me today. Natalie, it is so great to connect with you. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Kenny. I'm really excited to be here too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't wait to hear more about your book and how people can connect with you. But I really want to start with your backstory and what in your career led you to really make this the center of what you do and how you help other leaders today, which is, I think you're doing just tremendous work. But tell us a little bit about your backstory and what led you to really make trust as kind of a centerpiece for you.
Thank you. Well, I learned early on it's all about trust. I knew that intuitively, but didn't really realize it until I was the one responsible for sales and marketing at a software company. So I spent, Kenny, most of my career before I started Success Through Trust 10 years ago in the IT industry, working with software companies and business process outsourcing companies and technical companies, working with a lot of technical folks, helping them to deliver and to promote software products. And I spent a lot of my career in roles like marketing communications or product management, and all sorts of marketing roles. And I loved working with customers. I always loved understanding what was most important to the customer. So I was with this software company, Kenny, for many years, loved working with them, worked globally. And the CEO asked me to take over the sales role. And I really didn't want to do that, Kenny. I just really didn't. I think I was like a lot of people. I was nervous of the term sales. And the other thing is, when you're responsible for sales, you are responsible and you're very accountable. And every month or every quarter, it's very tangible. So I kept saying no. And finally, my decision changed. And I said, okay, sure, I'll do it. And for me, that was really bad timing, Kenny, because then the market crashed. It was a long time ago now. It was 2008. But all of our products and services were either put on hold. Our customers decided to not buy because our customers were in the hospitality industry. And we were at a standstill and no sales were being made. So I did what I knew best, and the only thing I knew to do, which was to look around and figure out how is it that customers decide to buy. So I started talking to some of the most successful people I knew, and they all said pretty much the same thing. And that is just focus on the customer, Natalie, just focus. And I'm really from the belief that we all want to make it our own decision to buy. None of us want to be sold to. And so that's what we did. And our whole team just focused on the clients and focused on helping out as much as we could. And of course, when you're not selling and you're just focusing on doing whatever you can do to help your clients out, what happens is they start coming to you, and our sales started going back up.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, I got so interested and loved working with customers and really understanding, how to better serve them, that I decided to go back to school, and I did my graduate research on how is it that customers decide to buy in primarily a business to business environment. So I quickly found out that it all comes down to trust, Kenny. First, we decide to trust, then we make a decision to get on someone's podcast, to buy a product, to invest, to work for a company. It all comes down to trust. I got so excited about this that I did all my research and my thesis about this, and did primary research, and then created a measurement tool and a way to apply this to the scientific method. So there's a repeatable and proprietary framework that I built for people to be able to follow, to build, strengthen, and protect trust. And as you know, it's based on science and evidence and review, academic and commercial review. And I started teaching people how to do this and how to learn the skills of becoming a trusted leader. Got so excited about it that many of my clients asked me, can you just write it all down? And so then I wrote a book about it called The Power of Trust: How Top Companies Build, Manage, and Protect It. I published that in 2017 and created some online courses. And now, as you know, I do workshops on Zoom like this and in person, and help companies become the most trusted in their industry. So we started with, how can we better serve a customer? How can we help them? And how is it that customers decide to buy? And like I said, it all starts with, and it all comes down to trust. It's the very first question we all ask. We ask it subconsciously, Kenny, but it's actually first question. First we're saying, okay, can I trust? Then we look at the capabilities. Then we say, okay, do they have the products, or do they have the service, or do they have the expertise that we're looking for? But it's very first is trust.
Wow. I love it. And I love that you're hitting it from a lot of different angles, but I love that it started at the core of just from the customer point of view, which we all are, customers and consumers, every single day. So I really want to dive in, because I was fascinated as I listened to you, as I read a lot more about you, how you talk about trust is actually a science. And I personally had never heard that before. And so, because I just thought that it wasn't a very tangible thing, but you also talk about how companies can measure it. So go into that. Talk about first, how is trust actually a science?
Well, it's based on science. So the framework that I created and the model that I created is actually based on science and evidence.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what that means is that I did primary research, as I mentioned, doing my graduate research, and then created principles of how to build trust. So when we apply principles in each and every interaction that we have, we get a result. I then, after creating these principles through primary research and academic research, I then validated this framework by doing experiments. And to create something based on a scientific method, there's several different steps that you go through to create a validated framework and tool. And so I went through those 7 steps, and surveyed and tested it with upwards of over 80,000 people.
Wow.
So
Okay.
a very large sample size.
Yeah.
And the framework and tools, all of my frameworks and tools that I use in my practice are all based on science and evidence. And because they're evidence-based, what this means is that when you apply the principles and you apply the tools that I share in the interactions, the communications, and the behavior, you build trust. And it's a reliable and valid tool in that when you do this, not only does it build trust, it's also directly correlated with propensity to continue to buy products and services,
Mm-hmm.
to recommend products and services, loyalty, satisfaction.
Mm.
So it's pretty exciting because it's a
Yeah.
step-by-step process, Kenny.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it can make it so practical.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of us talk about, you hear a lot of talk about, oh, we have to build trust or we have to do this. And I come from a place of how do we make it practical?
Mm.
So I actually, like I said, I teach people in workshops and in, you know, training programs, coaching programs, how to apply the 8 principles of trust and how to learn how to be more trustworthy.
That's
And
awesome. Yeah.
the skill that can be learned.
Yeah.
And when we focus on it, we become more trustworthy.
Yeah. Natalie, that is fascinating. I want to hit on what you just said because that when we were talking before, I'm really curious because I think that I felt for a long time, and I've changed over the years, but I felt like there was some people I felt like I met, leaders in my life that seemed to be naturally trustworthy. That it's
Yeah.
like within 5 minutes, you know, I'm like, oh man, I trust this person, I trust this guy, I trust this lady. Um, that's not always the case though, right? This is a skill you just said that can be taught, learned. Talk a little bit more about that and some practical ways that leaders can start with really building what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, you are 100% correct. Many of us meet people and we have an instant connection and we're instant trustworthy. However, there are a lot of folks that don't experience that. And some people have some natural trustworthy characteristics, I would say, but there's a very large percentage of the population, Kenny, that don't.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, what I've found is that a lot of very technical folks who have a background in, you know, focusing on something that's very technical, or have a background that in their experience, they don't have a lot of experience and interaction with other people, haven't learned these skills. So as an example, I work with a lot of technical folks. So professional engineers, professional accountants, scientists, you know, people from healthcare that might have technical skills. Well, when you focus on technical skills all the time and not the skills of relationship building skills, that's what you become really good at. But at the end of the day, the managers, the people in companies that have relationship building skills, trust building skills, are the ones who advance and become leaders. So here's an example. I worked with one gentleman who I'll call his first name William to keep his anonymity, young man, electrical engineer, very successful in his company. And he went into our trusted advisor certification program. And he was placed in the program because he was a top performer in his group. He was as an electrical engineer, worked with construction companies and their partners and was very client facing. However, wasn't that confident. So his manager would be a little uncertain and maybe hesitant to send him to meetings because he didn't have the skills to build confidence in the client.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have the confidence in himself to communicate in a way that put the firm in the best light,
Mm-hmm.
because he had never been taught that we need to be open in our communication. We need to be fully transparent. And it's not that he wasn't trustworthy. However, he wasn't aware of the way he was communicating. So William came in this program, like I said, young engineer, and his goal, one of the reasons he wanted to be in it, is so that he would be more confident with clients. And his manager placed him in it because he saw that he was a natural leader in his group. He just didn't know it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And in most engineering firms, they want all client-facing people to manage client relationships, even if they aren't responsible for business development.
Mm-hmm.
So he went in the trusted advisor program, and it was really incredible, Kenny, because it was about 2 weeks in this 6-week program, 2 weeks in, that he had an epiphany. And we were doing an exercise around putting ourselves in the customer situation and really understanding what it's like to be a customer of their firm. And you could see the light bulb go off. And there were about 10 of us in the room. And he was like, wow, I never realized, like, this is what's going on in their firm.
Wow.
Well, fast forward 60 days later, he is now in a program to become the head of business development for his whole division.
Wow.
Because he now knows, we talk about what questions to ask and how to approach clients to really help them and to serve them. And, so one of the modules, as an example, is called the Socratic approach, and how to really best serve a client.
Mm-hmm.
And so William just didn't know, because he didn't learn what some may call soft skills. I call core skills. He just didn't know, because he never learned that in university, how to build relationships.
Wow.
So he's someone that wouldn't have known this intuitively, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I could share an example of another person, complete opposite, who I would say immediately builds trust with people. Her name is Jenna. And she was in one of my programs because she was in a customer support role. So when we talked earlier, you said a lot of your listeners work with call centers and are in, faced in very direct relationships with clients, if you will. Well, she was in one of these relationships. So as a customer support manager, she was on the phone all the time, talking to clients and helping them with their software. And she enrolled in the program really to see if there were any new things she could learn. And she was already a rock star in her organization.
Mm-hmm.
However, when it was a difficult conversation and managing a client's expectations, that was a bit challenging. And she had some pretty challenging clients.
Mm.
And, she went in the program and had an epiphany and I would say a light bulb moment when she realized that how we communicate and how we behave and how we serve impacts someone in a different way. So we really work at understanding what works best for the client,
mm-hmm.
what are different communication styles, and it all, comes down to how to build trust with an individual. That's one thing that's really important, Kenny, is that for those of us like you and I that say, sometimes you can build trust with someone instantly. It is an individual interaction. So it's a one-on-one interaction. We put trust in a company where we're actually putting trust in the people.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I love both those stories. Those are just both the opposite end of the spectrum. And so what are some other practical ways that I could measure that I'm nailing this, that I've got the trustworthiness factor in addition? And I love that you said, even though you're really, really good, the engineer that's really good at the technical skills
Your
was
skilled.
lacking in that, now how can I measure that, hey, I'm starting to nail this?
Well, there are lots of ways you can measure it. Externally, you can measure it by, um, you know, seeing the number of referrals increase.
Yes.
Internally, you can see it by the number of calls coming in to ask more questions to buy more products and services. You
Hmm.
can measure it by increase in sales revenue, if you will. You can measure it by the length of time in the sales process.
Mm-hmm.
You can also measure it by engagement inside an organization, right?
Hmm.
When you have high trust inside an organization, people are more productive. People are more engaged.
Mm.
There's this statistic that I wanted to share with you that it was a study done. There's tons of statistics around the business case and how to measure the success of an organization. I mean, trust really truly is the leading indicator for success in an
Wow.
organization. And in
Wow.
fact, my research has shown that when you have a high trust equity score, so I have a tool that I call the Client Trust Index. It's a diagnostic. We survey customers, Kenny, and then you get a trust equity score. So that is a measurement of customers trusting you.
Hmm.
So that's another way to measure it. But if you don't want to do that, you can just look at all the things I mentioned to you about the
Hmm.
referrals and all that good stuff.
Hmm.
But there was a study done that I thought you might be interested in, and your listeners might be interested, a while ago, where in 6,500 employees at the Holiday Inns rated their managers on a scale of 1 to 5.
Uh-huh.
That's a pretty large study,
Oh yeah.
6,500.
Wow.
And the researchers found that a 1/8 increase and 1/8 point increase in scores could increase the company's profit by 2.5%.
Wow.
So what that means is if they had a higher trust, each hotel would have $250,000 a year more in
Wow.
profit.
Wow. Wow. That is huge. There's a big measuring stick right there.
It's
Wow.
huge.
Wow.
And on the opposite side, or maybe not the opposite side, but on the other side of the fence, there's a very well-known study out there that that 58% of people worldwide trust a complete stranger more than they trust their boss.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I share that so that your audience knows it's actually the number one indicator of
Yeah.
success for a company.
Yeah.
And when you ask, what practical advice would I have for your audience, for leaders, for managers, what I would say, it's the number one thing to focus on.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it's it here's an analogy. So it's a lot like safety. So if you think about organizations that have a safety officer, they have a focus on safety. So maybe a manufacturing company might, lots of organizations do, but some companies, it's front and center.
Hmm.
When you focus on safety, what happens is you have monthly or weekly or bi-weekly meetings. You have a safety officer. You have, maybe toolbox Tuesdays or toolbox Thursdays, and you
Right.
have safety meetings and events. And And the focus on safety really makes it a safer environment, and you have less incidents.
Yes.
Very similar with trust, Kenny.
Mm.
When you focus on having a culture of trust, and when you focus on always thinking about building trust with your team, or how can you regain trust, or how can you build trust with your customer, and when it's top of mind, and you're always thinking about how to apply the principles of trust to each and every interaction, and how you communicate, or how you behave, and how you serve, you will become more trustworthy.
Wow. Wow. That makes so much sense. You're 100% dead on. And thank you for that for our audience, especially. That is so meaningful. This has been fascinating. I've got to get in one or two other quick questions for you, because I want to leave you time to talk about how folks can connect with you and get that book. I mentioned to you before we started about mistrust and how it can happen, right? We might say or do the wrong thing. And I'm usually in my career, I was very, very, I'll give you several chances, but I could probably think of a few leaders now that I still to this day wouldn't trust.
Yeah.
Is there a path back when there's mistrust? And if so, how?
There is a path back, Kenny. And what I would say, you never want to lose trust. Okay. So, first of all, what I would recommend is always be thinking about, always be building your trust equity with someone, always be building that on that. Because when you have, and if you think back to your career and those folks that you're thinking about in your mind, I suspect you didn't have that much trust built up with them. See, when you have trust built up, when someone makes a mistake, which we all do, we can go into that trust bank, if you will, and forgive. When you have trust equity built up, it's easier to forgive. When you don't, that is when it's very difficult to regain it.
Yes.
That's the very first thing. So if you're proactive and you're always building it, you have trust equity built up.
Mm-hmm.
However, sometimes it happens that you don't have that in the case that I think you're thinking of. When I look at your face, I think you're thinking that wasn't the case.
You're dead on. Yep.
And so there are ways, and in fact, one of the things we talk about in one of my courses is, how to come back from that. And so the very first step that I would suggest is to acknowledge that there's been a breach of trust, or something's happened to destroy trust. So that's the very first thing, is to acknowledge and to ask the person, are you open to having a conversation about this?
Yeah.
And so, some people aren't. So then I would apologize in a sincere fashion, sincere and authentic and truthful
Absolutely.
fashion, right?
Absolutely.
And to really be honest and transparent about what happened. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we make mistakes and we actually have no clue as to how it's affecting the other people. Sometimes we say things and we don't have any intention of doing the wrong thing, but we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's great advice. And so I would also say, I love what you said before about referrals being a real good measurement. I think also when people refer, so nobody's going to be unhappy at a company and refer their friend to work there. Vice versa.
That's right.
You and I know this, right? We're not going to refer our friends or family to go to a restaurant that we don't trust anymore, So you can say, hey, yeah, I had a bad experience, but go ahead and go. Yeah.
So if I could just mention one thing about referrals, Kenny.
Please. Yeah.
You had a podcast a few weeks ago or episodes ago. I listened to it a few episodes ago around the talent gap.
Yes.
And that is an issue for many organizations, and I'm sure lots of your listeners. And when you have high trust with your employees, you actually are combating that gap, because people want to work with and stay with companies they trust. They recruit their friends. They tell their neighbors and their colleagues about what it's like to work in this organization.
Yeah.
I work with usually two types of organizations. One that's really trying to build trust with customers and they're really trying to grow their business, or a company that's got great business and they want to continue to be the most trustworthy and they want to keep all the people that they have. So how they do that is they focus on training and offering professional development and personal development opportunities for their current employees, and so that they build trust inside. And then what happens is they have more engagement, which drives, productivity, efficiency, and employee referrals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a great retention strategy and a great recruitment strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll ask you this, I promise, last question, aside from how folks can connect with you. Can that trust start right there at the interview process?
100%. I love that you asked that, Carrie. Yes.
Yeah.
100%. And clearly you and I could talk all day about how to do that.
Yeah.
It's about being open and honest and showing that you're acting in the person's best interest right away. So
awesome.
100%.
Awesome. Now they're going to have to get your book to learn a little bit more about that, as well as you have 8 different steps there that I loved. But they're going to have to get your book. So how can folks, this has been amazing, by the way. I can't thank you enough. But now, how can folks connect with you, work with you, and get your book?
Well, they can connect with me through my website, which is successthroughtrust.com, or on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn at Natalie Doyle Oldfield. And my book is on Amazon.com. It's as you know, it's called The Power of Trust: How Top Companies Build, Manage, and Protect It. And you can work with me through, I do training with companies. Sometimes they bring me in to speak to leadership teams. We have group training programs and one-on-one programs. Best way is to reach out through either LinkedIn or my website. And for those of you who are wondering about, are you the most trusted in your industry now, and how's your team doing? I actually have an assessment on my website, Kenny, that you can download. And that's complimentary. So you can download that assessment and see how you're doing now. And if folks are interested, I'm happy to have a conversation about your results. You get the results, and we can schedule a call to go through that if anyone's interested. And it's really all about assessing the trustworthiness of your team to help companies become the most trusted in their industry.
Yeah, that is so awesome. And you're being modest, because there's a lot of great information on your website. That's one of them. So thank you so much for offering that. That is awesome. Natalie, I wish you just nothing but crazy success. What you're doing is so needed. And in industry and in businesses where trust has been lost. And you brought a lot of light and a lot of hope back today, but you brought a nice blueprint on how we can establish that right from the beginning. So thank you so much for all you do. And please, please, please continue to do it.
Thank you, Kenny.
Awesome.
An indicator of success, being trusted.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. No doubt. You heard it. You heard it here, folks. Trust equity. Build up that trust equity. No doubt. Folks, we're going to leave it there. So this has been Kenny and Natalie. This has been the Leading from the Middle podcast. We'll talk to you real soon.